Muscle review. So this is not full-on kinesiology. It's muscles, their actions, their origins, and their insertions, the ones I feel are the most important to focus on and know. Also some test points and specific pathologies that are for muscles. Right. So kinesiology goes a little bit further. It goes into different concepts of muscle contractions and concentric and eccentric and all that stuff. I do plan on doing another session for that, but I really want to focus on muscle. So we'll touch on it a little bit, but it's not all of the like kinesiology section of the test, mostly the muscles and some practice questions as well. I'm using the polling feature. So we'll see how that goes, but I don't know. I thought maybe do a couple as we go, or maybe just save them all to the end. We'll see how the flow is going. But you will have access to these slides. For now, the link will come to you automatically in an email, but for now it's on Jamboard. So it just looks like the slides as you see them, just without the animations. I'm trying to I tried to use a platform where I could release like a flip book and like it didn't work. So I'm going back to Old Faithful. I can always rely on Google. Google works the best. I don't care what anybody says. I'll die on that hill. But anyways, let's get started. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and pull this up. Okay, so you should see my opening page here. I have my hard copy here because I got a bunch of stickers and whatnot across the screen, so I can't always see what exactly is in the corners and whatnot. Hopefully you guys can. You can minimize like the pictures and stuff, but I will be doing some demonstrations here in this box, so it is helpful if you could see me. I think if you change your view to like speaker view, you should be able to see me in the corner still while I'm screen sharing. Can you guys see me? Can I get a thumbs up if you can? Okay. All right. So MBLEX muscle review. So this is somewhere between a complete list and like just the most important things. If you know me, I'm on TikTok, and that's where most of you guys probably found me, and then on Facebook by an extension of that. But I am a massage therapist, been teaching for almost 3 years now. I've been a massage therapist for 17 years. I enjoy teaching very much. I don't really practice anymore all my massages with my students and whatnot, but I am very passionate about teaching massage therapy. I love it. And I absolutely despise the MBLEX, I'll be honest. I'm not a fan of it. I think it's somewhat necessary. Yes, I understand what they're trying to do, but I'm not really a big fan of how it's being done. And I feel like it is not an entry-level test, okay? So all of you guys should be very proud of yourself when you pass, because this test is hard. The questions themselves are not necessarily that hard, but the scope of it is so wide. Like it covers so much that it makes it very difficult to study. And kinesiology, honestly, is the squeaky wheel that gets the most attention, because I feel like it's what we can try to drill and improve on the most, but it's still only about 12% of the test. 12% of the test. So it could be muscle actions, it could be origins, it could be insertions, it could be a lot of different things. But when I'm teaching my class, I do go in depth and we go through all the secondary actions and all those little bits of information that fall to the wayside when we get to MBLEX review. So this is not a fully complete list, but I feel like it is sufficient for MBLEX, and it's honestly a little bit more. I will point out to you the things that I know will be on the test, or it's a good possibility, the things that might be, and the things that I feel like I wouldn't even worry about that. So as you go through this, part of the reason I'm doing this is so that you'll understand my shorthand when you have the slides for yourself. But note some of these. There we go. If you see this little bell symbol, that means it's one of my drillers, which I'm going to explain on the next couple of pages. And if you see this, it is a specific exam point. Take my word for it. It comes from MBLEX. It's a specific point that I know, they know is a fact, okay, from them. And then anything that's grayed out is information that I do not think is a priority. I don't believe it's going to come up, but it's on here just for completeness. I would save it for last. After you learn all the actions, and then once you get more familiar with the origins and insertions, if you want to go back and look at some of that stuff that's grayed out, great. But if you never get to it and you don't remember it, I don't think it'll cost you too many questions, okay? So that's what that is about. All right, so first things first, and I'm gonna be trying to keep an eye out for people who are joining. I don't know if chat will like tell me if somebody has a question. I know if you raise a hand though, I'll see it right here. All right, so I'm going back to some of the basics because I don't know where everybody's program was, and everybody's program was vastly different. And I've talked to several people who feel like their program was just insufficient. They didn't learn some of the basics. So this document does go over some of those basic points that help you to understand that I build on with my students so that they can understand the muscles a little better. And one of the first things is muscle terminology. Like the names of the muscles tell you something. Okay, a lot of muscles tell you exactly what they do, where they are, what they attach to, and whatnot. So recognize that muscles could tell you about their shapes. So like trapezius looks something like a trapezoid. Quadratus has 4 sides. We have 4 quadratus muscles in the body. They look roughly rectangular, kind of square. A teres muscle is going to be like a long tube, right? Like a rounded tube. Splenius is bandage. So when we talk about like the splenius capitis, kind of looks like a bandage coming on the neck, kind of flat and wide. If it's serratus, that means it's serrated. Think like a serrated knife. It's got a jagged appearance and it attaches to the ribs with all those jagged edges, okay? Muscles can tell you about their actions. Of course, these are a little bit more intuitive. Flexor, extensor, adductor, abductor, levator, elevates, erectors keep us erect, right? They can tell you about the fiber direction. So if it's transverse, it probably runs horizontally, like the transverse abdominis, okay? Oblique means it's diagonal. Rectus means straight, like rectus femoris, rectus abdominis. They can tell you about their size, major, minor, longest, brevis, minimus, medius, maximus. Here's another thing about the names. If the name has a descriptor like this, there's probably one to match it. There's a reason. If there's a minor, there's probably a major. If there's a longest, there's probably a brevis, okay? If there's a minimus, there's probably a maximus or some other form of bigger, right? They can also tell you how many there are. So like your biceps has 2 heads, including like biceps femoris, okay? Triceps has 3 heads, quadriceps has 4. And then of course, the biggest category, locations. A lot of these muscles tell you exactly where they are or what they attach to in the name. Brachii means brachium. So we have 5 brachium muscles. Femoris means it attaches to the femur in some kind of way. Capitis means it goes all the way to the cap, all the way to the skull, okay? Radialis, radius, ulnaris, ilio is ilium. We see that iliocostalis, right? Costal is ribs. When you see costal, you know ribs. So like the iliocostalis runs from the ilium to the ribs, right? Spinalis is in the spine. Cervicis means neck. So how we have splenius capitis and splenius cervicis. One goes to the neck, one goes all the way to the cap. Lumborum lumbar, thoracis, and dorsi, of course, is back. And then directions. Okay, medial, lateral, anterior, posterior. Again, if there's one, there's probably another one with the other name. Okay, serratus anterior, serratus posterior, rectus capitis posterior, rectus capitis anterior. All right, superficialis versus profundus, which is profound and deep. Externus, internus. Inter means in between. So again, we have like intercostals. They tell you they're in between the ribs. Okay. Sub means below, like the suboccipitals are below the occiput. Okay, inferior, internal, external, and whatnot. So the names tell you a lot. They give you a lot of clues as to where a muscle is, and that might help you with the actions. Hence my next point. We're good? We're good? Thumbs up, everybody? Okay. All right, so some principles of muscle contractions that'll kind of help you. All right, please remember that muscles pull, okay? Muscles pull. When we go back to talking about muscle tissue creates movement by contracting. The sliding filament theory, they simply get shorter, pull two bones together, two attachment points together. That's it, they pull. So if you recognize or understand that muscles pull, that kind of helps you. So that means if it flexes or medially rotates, it's probably on the front of the body because it's going to pull into that position. When we talk about flexion, like flexing the shoulder, right? Flexion generally goes this way. So it's going to pull into flexion. It's going to be on the front of the body because it's going to have to pull into flexion. When we talk about medial rotation, okay, looking at the front of the humerus, medial rotation, it's rotating inwards or internal rotation. So that muscle has to be somewhere on the front, pulling into a medial rotation, okay? So medial rotation, okay? Flexion, all right? Usually, I say usually because there are a few exceptions, okay? And by that same token, if it extends, it's probably on the back. Because if I'm going to pull into extension, I'm going to be behind to pull it into extension. Pull the elbow into extension, right? Pull the wrist into extension. These muscles are usually on the back, okay? That goes into abduction and adduction of the scapula too. If it's on the back, it's probably going to pull the scapula into adduction. If it's on the front, it's going to pull it into abduction. And we'll talk about those actions as we go through them, right? The notable exceptions to that are like the knee, because the knee is not as intuitive, it's backwards. So when it flexes, the leg comes back. So in that case, the hamstrings are on the back, but they're still pulling on the knee. They are pulling the knee into extension. Oh, we're down too low. Let's do this. Okay. They are pulling the knee into extension. So when we're talking about the knee, the hamstrings are on the back. Okay. But the concept is the same. It's pulling. Another notable exception is the latissimus dorsi and teres major, which we'll talk about when we get to them, but it's on the back and yet it immediately rotates. That's an exception. Then, of course, the toes, okay, because extension runs this way, so they extend, but they're on the front of the leg. Again, we'll talk about that. Those are extensions, but generally, if it's on the front, it's going to pull towards the front. If it's on the back, it's going to pull towards the back, okay? And then that goes right into adduction and abduction. If it's going to adduct, okay, if you want to adduct a limb, the muscle has to be somewhere here so that it can pull it. It can shorten and pull it into adduction, okay? If it's going to abduct a limb, it's got to be on the outside or up top in order to pull into abduction, okay? So like supraspinatus and deltoid are on top of the shoulder, and when they shorten, they pull the arm up into abduction, okay? So muscles that adduct have to be below or inside to pull into adduction, and muscles that abduct have to be on the outside in order to pull the limb away from the body, okay? And same with elevation and depression. Thinking about this here scapula, okay? If it's above, it's going to pull it up into elevation. If it's below, it's going to pull it down into depression. Okay? All right. So, the other concept, when a muscle performs its action, as you're drilling the muscles, the splenius capitis extends, side bends, ipsilaterally rotates. When it performs that action, it shortens. Just the same as it's always pulling, it's going to shorten. So when you see questions about lengthening and shortening, okay, when a muscle performs its given action, it's shortening. When the opposite action happens, it's lengthening. Okay, if you want to stretch a muscle, you do the opposite of what it does. Biceps flexes the elbow. So if I want to stretch it, I have to extend the elbow. That's going to lengthen those fibers. Okay. Shortening is when the muscle is doing its action. Lengthening is when it does the opposite, okay? That goes into We're going to talk just a tiny bit about eccentric and concentric contractions. The reason MBLEX loves those lengthen and shorten questions so much is because it's always a true statement. If I say extending the elbow lengthens the fibers of biceps, shortens the fibers of triceps, that's always a true statement. Flexing the elbow shortens the biceps, lengthens the triceps. We can't necessarily say it's always a true statement that extending the elbow is caused by the triceps, because that's not true when it's an eccentric contraction of the biceps. So sometimes, if you've seen my videos, when you're holding something heavy, even though I'm extending the elbow, this is the biceps doing the work. So it's not a false statement to say that the biceps kind of extend the elbow. That can be challenged, right? But what is a true statement is extending the elbow will lengthen these fibers and shorten these fibers. I think that's why MBLEX usually goes for that wording in the questions, okay? It's usually going to say lengthen or shorten the fibers with this action, because which muscle is doing the work is a different question. That's an eccentric concentric contraction question. So when a muscle performs its action, it's shortening, okay? When the opposite action is happening, whether it's doing the work or not, it's lengthening, okay? Shortening when it's doing its action, lengthening when the opposite is happening, okay? Regardless of who's doing the work. Okay, and then the other thing, muscle relationships, okay? Generally, you are okay with MBLEX if you understand that agonist and prime mover is any muscle performing the action that you're talking about, okay? If I'm talking about the biceps, it is the prime mover of flexion, it's the agonist, okay? It's doing the work. A synergist is any muscle that's doing the same thing. A synergist does the same thing, antagonists do the opposite. That's what we care most about for MBLEX. Synergist muscles do the same action, antagonist muscles do the opposite. Okay, for every action, there's an antagonist doing the opposite or lengthening while we do that action. Okay, fixators and stabilizers support the joints and the surrounding areas. Neutralizers stop secondary action. So take, for instance, the sternocleidomastoid. It doesn't just flex. It doesn't just side bend. It doesn't just rotate. It wants to do all three. When a muscle contracts, it wants to do everything it can do at one time, which means when this muscle contracts, it wants to do this. Okay, but we don't want to do all that. We just want to side bend. So your brain will recruit other muscles to stop the rotation and the flexion so that we're only side bending. That's what a neutralizer does. Doesn't necessarily come up on MBLEX, but it's good to understand that concept. Now, here's where it gets dicey, admittedly. When we're talking about a specific action, like supination, that's my favorite example because that's one that I know to be fat. There is a muscle that is designated as the prime mover of that action, and any other muscles are synergists. So biceps is the prime supinator. Supinator is a synergist, okay? Another example that's pretty clear cut, elevation of the scapula. Pretty sure that trapezius is the prime elevator of the scapula, and rhomboids and levator scapula are synergists in that action. So when you're talking about an action, yes, you can have a prime mover, and all the other movers, all the other muscles that do that same action are designated as synergists because they're not as strong. They assist the triceps. I keep saying triceps, trapezius. They assist the trapezius, okay, the traps. Here's the problem. Okay, we have gotten a couple of questions that come up about this, but it's not always obvious which one is actually the prime mover. For instance, say you got a question, may or may not be a direct question, says which muscle assists in adduction of the shoulder, pec major or triceps. My instincts tell me pec major because it's bigger and stronger, but the correct answer was triceps. And I'm like, well, how are we supposed to know that? because that is not explicitly stated in Trail Guide. I don't know where that information came from. I started doing some digging, and I know that MBLEX does not give us a list of resources that they use for these questions. Okay. In fact, if you go onto their website, they have a video explaining that they used to have a list of resources, a partial list, but they got rid of it because students were complaining that their school didn't have them write the right book. And it says in 2017, the FSMTB will no longer be providing a reference list. So I don't know what resource they get that information from. It would be very helpful if they would share that with us. I think it would be very fair to give people a fair opportunity to study this information specifically, but we don't have that. And it's not always apparent. So here's where I have to leave that. These questions may come up. It's not always apparent which one is considered the prime mover. I'm trying to reach out to somebody, email, and find out how can we get this specific information. If you put it on the test, it's not fair to tell us where it came from. So we can't verify how you know that information. So we don't always know. That's one that I have never, ever made my students drill or be stressed about. Don't worry too much about which muscle is the specific prime mover. Because honestly, we don't even have the resource that tells us for sure. If you Google that, some people say coracobrachialis is the prime mover. Some say triceps. Some say pec major. Which one? I don't know. They won't tell us. I have nothing. I have nothing for that. And I don't know what to say about it other than I'm going to try to get in contact with somebody, say, hey, this is not fair. So don't worry about that. Just understand that synergists perform the same actions, antagonists perform the opposite actions. So far, hasn't really been a problem. Okay, my students have passed just the same. So that's my spiel on that. But drillers, right? So these are facts that I like my students to fully understand. And they stay up on my board. We talk about them constantly so that as we're going through these muscles and we say, okay, that's a neck muscle. What does that mean? Does three things, right? So here's the first one. Neck muscles flex or extend. They side bend because there's one on each side, and they rotate because there's one on each side. Another popular way that MBLEX likes to present a question is with unilateral or bilateral contraction. Okay, think about what that means. If you have a neck muscle, there's one on each side. Bilateral contraction means both sides are firing at the same time. So that's going to produce, if it's on the front, flexion, if it's on the back, extension. Unilateral contraction means just one side. That's how you end up with side bending. Right side contract, you bend over to the right. Left side contracts, you bend over to the left. Same with rotation. Right side contracts, you get rotation in one direction. Left side contracts, you get rotation in the opposite direction. So all neck muscles either flex or extend, depending on whether it's a front of neck muscle or a back of neck muscle. A front of neck muscle is going to pull into flexion. A back of neck muscle is going to pull into extension, okay? There's one on each side. So all neck muscles are going to laterally flex or side bend to the left or to the right. And you will hear either side bend or lateral flexion. Either one will come up on the test, okay? And then they're going to rotate. You have ipsilateral rotation and contralateral rotation, okay? Ipsilateral rotators turn to the same side. So your right side is going to turn you to the right. Your left side is going to turn you to the left, okay? But then we have contralateral rotators, which means your right side turns you to the left, your left side turns you to the right. Those have their own driller section because those are the ones that have an extra layer of thought for you. So those are the ones I like to drill, okay? Contralateral rotators turn you to the opposite side. So that's transversal spinalis is a contralateral rotator. I do not believe that muscle to be very important. I don't think it comes up that often, but you might see it as a distractor. So it's good to at least have an idea of what it is. And it is a contralateral rotator. But here's the four that really matter. Right here, these four matter. I have, there we go. These four matter. So sternocleidomastoid, scalenes, trapezius, and then the external obliques. Remember those four contralaterally rotate. Sternocleidomastoid, scalenes, trapezius, external obliques. Okay? And we'll talk about them as we get to them. But sternocleidomastoid, scalenes, trapezius, and external obliques are your contralateral rotators. You must remember that. That is one of those hardcore NBLEX points that you do not want to forget. All right, and then we have anterior tilt muscles. I also like to have my students drill these because they do come up, all right? So the pelvis can tilt anteriorly and posteriorly. Let's bring this guy over here. Anterior tilt just means it's going to tilt forward. So you're going to try to pour water out the front of your pelvis. Anterior tilt. Posterior tilt means it tilts backwards and you're going to pour water out the back. So anterior tilt is like sway back. You got an extra curve in the back, often associated with hyperlordosis. Okay. Anterior tilt. The back of your pelvis is coming up, the front is going down, and you're pouring water out the front. Posterior tilt means you're pouring water out the back. So think like a little old man, like with a really tight stomach, kind of pulled back. Okay. Anterior tilt, posterior tilt. I came up with a mnemonic that helps my students remember. Nosy people lean anteriorly. So mind your P's and Q's. If you've ever heard the expression, mind your P's and Q's, mind your pints and quarts, right? You're in the pub drinking your beer, you mind your pints, you mind your quarts. Don't worry about what's going on over here. So nosy people lean anteriorly and you tell them mind your P's and Q's. So psoas, there's your P. Quadratus lumborum and quads are all your anterior tilt muscles. When your client presents with an anterior tilt, maybe they have hyperlordosis, maybe they are sway back. That means their quads are going to be tight, their quadratus lumborum is going to be tight, and their psoas muscles are going to be tight. Okay. On the other side of that, the posterior tilt muscles are your hamstrings and your rectus abdominis. If they are too tight, they're going to give you a posterior tilt. Okay. And these muscles are opposite of each other. So if your client has an anterior tilt, that means the psoas, quads, and QL might be tight. At the same time, your hamstrings and rectus abdominis are going to be loose or overstretched. If you have a posterior tilt, that means the hamstrings and the hamstrings and the rectus abdominis are tight, and your psoas, quads, and QL are going to be overstretched or loose. All right. So we'll talk about that when we get to those muscles as well. Another driller, the pes inserine. All the muscles that attach to the pes inserine are silly goose steps, okay? So let's scoot down here. The pes inserine is on the medial proximal tibia. The medial proximal tibia. Remember, proximal means closer to the body, distal means further away. Medial is more towards the midline. So the proximal medial tibia is the pes inserine. And there you see it right there in blue. I don't know if you can see that or not, but in blue right there. All right. There you have a tendon that looks something like a goose foot. That's why it's called silly goose steps. And the three muscles that attach there are sartorius, gracilis, and semitendinosus. Sartorius, gracilis, and semitendinosus. And what that means is these three muscles flex the knee and medially rotate the knee. So sartorius comes from up here, attaches there. Gracilis is right with the adductors and attaches there. Semitendinosus comes from the hamstrings and attaches right here on the proximal medial tibia. And they flex the knee. So when I flex the knee, all those tendons pull my knee into flexion. Then once it's flexed, they medially rotate. So they're going to rotate my foot medially. Okay, pes inserine. That is worth the drilling so that you remember if it attaches to the pes inserine, we already know it flexes the knee and then it medially rotates the knee, meaning it turns that knob, that tibial tuberosity inward. Because once the knee is flexed, then you can rotate it. Okay, when the knee is straight, rotation is coming from the hip. So if somebody has their feet pointed out, that means their hip is rotated outward. But once your knee is flexed, then you can turn your foot independent of the hip. Okay, so when you talk about rotation of the knee, already assume it's a flexed knee. So all the pes anserine muscles flex the knee, immediately rotate that flexed knee, which again, I'll describe when we get to it. Another test point, any muscle that attaches to the ribs is going to help with breathing, okay? Scalenes, sternocleidomastoid, they attach to the ribs. Sternocleidomastoid attaches to the clavicle. Pec major and minor attached to the ribs. Serratus anterior also attaches to the ribs. Those muscles will all kick in when you have forced inhalation. So, you know, when somebody's breathing really deep, you see these muscles get tight right up here because they help elevate the ribs when you need to breathe. When you're out of breath, you got some sort of restriction in your breathing, they will recruit all these muscles that attach to the rib to help elevate the ribs, okay? So any muscle that attaches to the ribs of the clavicle, automatically assume it helps with breathing. It helps elevate the rib cage, okay? QL and abdominals attach to the rib at the bottom, right? So abdominals, actually, they compress the content, so that helps with forced exhalation. But serratus posterior, QL, they attach to the ribs, so they do help stabilize and with forced exhalation because they pull the ribs down, okay? So any muscles that attach to the ribs, you can pretty much assume they probably help with breathing in some way, okay? Last two test points are not super duper important to MBLEX in my opinion. That's why they're gray. But the everters of the foot, extensor digitorum longus and fibularis brevis, when we talk about the compartments of the legs, the tibialis inverts, the hallucis, all these muscles invert or evert. Just remember the three that evert, all the rest invert, okay? That's why I've added as a driller. My three everters are extensor digitorum longus and fibularis longus and brevis. And then I absolutely hate rotation of the scapula. It messes up all my beautiful studying. That makes it all nice and easily compartmentalized. But if you remember the two muscles that upwardly rotate, the others downwardly rotate. It's gray, so don't worry about it. If you circle back around to this and you can remember it, great. If not, don't worry about it. But your upward rotators are trapezius and serratus anterior, which I will talk about when we get to them. All right, and then finally, these are sprinkled throughout. They are green. They are marked with this test point right here. These are your specific pathologies as you work through the muscles that are associated with a pathology on the MBLEX, okay? This is just all of them in one place. We'll talk about them. The only one that's not in this deck is spasm, okay? A spasm is an involuntary contraction, much like a cramp. If it's clonic, that just means it's cycling between contraction and relaxation, contraction and relaxation. A tonic spasm is a sustained contraction, okay? So clonic and tonic. Clonic, think cyclone, think a cycle, whereas tonic is just toned, you're just tight. It's just a sustained spasm, okay? Other than that, we'll see all of these through the deck. So any questions before I get into the muscles? Okay.
Sorry, I had to unmute my thing. I was one that did not pass the exam the first time. School's now closed, whatever. But I remember being on the test was the question about the anterior posterior as far as what muscle is loosened and tightened. Mm-hmm. Now, is it the opposite is what you're saying? So if your anterior pelvic tilt, then the posterior muscles are going to be tight, or is they loose?
They're going to be loose. So if you have an anterior tilt, the muscles that perform that action are going to be short and tight. The ones that do the opposite, which is closer to tight, are going to be loose or overstretched. And remember, that
was on the test.
Yes, they love that one. And that can be asked. Yes. They could say, what muscle is tight? What muscle might need to be strengthened? What muscle might need to be loosened? All those wordings.
There's quite a few of those. That's where I got a little nervous because, yes, there's a few of those.
Yep, okay. That's why I made it a driller.
That light bulb went off. Thank you.
Problem. All right. And I'm still watching for people. I don't see anybody. Okay. All right, so let's get into the actual meat of it, like the actual muscles. Hold on one second. All right. All right, so let's start with the neck muscles. Right off the bat, so the pictures that I'm using, these are Gray's Anatomy pictures. And if my memory serves me correctly, when I took the NBLEX, they use Gray's Anatomy's pictures. Okay, they use these old drawings. Like if I remember correctly, I think I got a few pictures and I remember them being these pictures in particular. So I thought it would be useful to use these. Plus these are in the Commons, so I don't have to like pay Trail Guide for their pictures. So these are the pictures. And I remember something like this, like the pictures looking like this when I took my test. So first muscle up. Okay, longus capitis and longus coli, they are front of neck muscles, regular muscles, and that is a driller, right? That's capitis, goes all the way to the cap, and coli. I didn't even put the origins and insertions for these because I am fairly confident that will not come up. If it does, I quit. I'm done with NBLEX. I'm over it. Come on, that would just be ridiculous. But it's a neck muscle and it's on the front, so it's going to flex. And there's one on each side, so it's going to laterally flex. And it's going to ipso rotate because it is not one of our contralateral rotators. The right side turns to the right, the left side turns to the left. Plain and simple, okay? These muscles do come up. In fact, here's a test point. Hypertonicity of the longus coli could reduce cervical lordosis. What the heck does that mean? All right, let's look at this. So you have curves in your spine, right? Okay, you have curves in your spine. You have a lordotic curve down here, right? Lordosis, a lordotic curve curves forward. So a lordotic curve here, a kyphotic curve in your back. So it humps back, curves out. And a lordotic curve at your neck again, okay? It makes an S. Let's also look here. This is a little bit more exaggerated. So lordotic, kyphotic, lordotic again. You have a cervical lordotic curve, okay? And what happens is, if this muscle, which is on the front, right? If this gets tight, it can reduce lordosis. It can pull the curve right out of your neck, okay? Imagine if you attached a rubber band from here to here and just it got tighter and tighter, it's going to pull the curve out of your neck, okay? That's what that question meant by your client. It says hypertonicity of what muscle, longus coli, okay, was the answer, can reduce cervical lordosis, okay? Tight front of neck muscles can pull the curve out of your neck and you get straight neck. All right. Splenius capitis cervicis. So from your regular front of neck muscles, we jump right into the regular back of neck muscles, which are the splenius muscles. Capitis and cervicis, between the two, capitis goes all the way to the mastoid process. That is a test point, okay? I don't like it, I hate it, but it is. So it runs from the spinous processes up to the mastoid process. Capitis. Cervicis runs from the spinous processes to the transverse processes. But most important, make sure you know that capitis goes to the mastoid process, okay? It's on the back, so it's going to extend. There's one on each side, so it's going to laterally flex. And it is not a contralateral rotator. It's a regular ipsilateral rotators. So the right side turns to the right, left side turns to the left. If I rotate my head to the right, my right splenius capitis gets short and tight. If I rotate to the right, my left splenius capitis will get longer, okay? So extend, laterally flex, ipso rotate. Also, grade out starts on the spinous process. I think the fact that it goes to the capitis, to the mastoid process is more important, okay? And then we have our contralateral rotators. Front of neck muscles. Sternocleidomastoid, all right, starts on the medial clavicle, the sternum, and goes to the mastoid process. All right. That is a test point, the fact that it starts on the medial clavicle. If I asked you on what part of the clavicle does the sternocleidomastoid start, you should be able to deduct it comes from here. So that's the medial clavicle as opposed to the lateral clavicle over here. It would be kind of weird if we had like just a big muscle coming from here to here, right? Okay, and it's a front of neck muscle, so it's going to flex. There's one on each side, so it's going to laterally flex. And it is a contralateral rotator. So the right side turns you to the left side turns you to the right. What does that look like? Grab your baby, your honey, your significant other. You put your hands on their head, and when you pull, my right hand is going to pull their head to the left. My left hand is going to pull their head to the right. Okay? This muscle starts in the front and reaches to the back. That's why it pulls opposite. And we love sternocleidomastoid because it's right here. We can see it, we can feel it. Finger on the clavicle, finger on the mastoid process. When I turn to the opposite side, I can see and feel that muscle get short and tight. Okay? When I turn to the same side, I see it get long. Look how much further apart my fingers are. So if nothing else, sternocleidomastoid is so useful in helping you remember what contralateral rotation means and looks like. Right side gets short and tight when I turn to the left, gets long and stretched when I turn to the same side because it's a contralateral rotator. The others are not as easy to visualize, but this one is. So always think back to sternocleidomastoid. It's right here. They can't take that away from you. Cannot take it away when you go take that test. Another thing, even though it's a contralateral rotator, it does help you see. When I do the actions of this muscle, it gets short and tight. I can see it. I can feel it. When I laterally flex to the same side, rotate to the opposite side, and flex forward, it's in the shortest possible position. Okay? If I extend, laterally flex to the other side, and turn to the same side, it's long and stretched. But look at this side, short and tight, okay? So when a muscle performs its action, it gets short and tight. When it does the opposite, it stretches, okay? So we love sternocleidomastoid. On that same token, okay, and it also helps elevate the ribs because it's attached to the clavicle, so forced inhalation. You see it. When people are stressed and breathing heavy, you see that muscle get tight. But here's another test point. Wryneck and torticollis, okay? Wryneck, and it literally means twisted neck. Infants get this a lot, okay? When it says your client's neck is laterally flexed, rotated, and short and tight, and your client has numbness and tingling, it's like kind of pinching stuff. Torticollis has people's head kind of like this, okay? That's associated with the tight SCM because it gets tight and short and it twists their neck. This is torticollis, okay? So you might get a test question that kind of describes that situation. Think SCM. Okay, scalenes are right there with them. In your studying, I would stick scalenes and sternocleidomastoids together. They do the exact same thing. They're front of neck muscles and they're contralateral rotators. You do want to know, this was a test point, if you're going hard on your origins and insertions, the anterior and middle scalenes attached to the first rib. You can see that right here. There's your anterior and middle scalenes. They attach to the first rib. Posterior scalenes attached to the second rib. I'm sorry. That was a practice test point. I think it's stupid, but it is what it is. Okay. So look at that. They go from the transverse processes. Anterior and middle hit rib 1. Posterior goes down to rib 2. Okay. They flex, laterally rotate, laterally flex, contralateral rotate, elevate the ribs because they attach to the ribs. Okay. But also thoracic outlet syndrome. Yeah, that's going to come up, almost guaranteed. The brachial plexus, which is the nerves that come out from the neck and they control everything about the arm, okay? That passes through the anterior and middle scalene. They specifically want you to remember that. It passes between, here's the anterior on this side, so it passes between the anterior and middle scalenes. Then it goes underneath the clavicle, underneath pec minor, down the arm. So when your client has numbness and tingling down their arm, their whole hand is numb and tingly, okay? They've been walking on crutches. Whatever the case may be, brachial plexus compression, thoracic outlet syndrome, okay? Scalenes, pec minor. I cannot drill that enough. Cannot drill it enough. It will come up, okay? So we have another opportunity because it comes up again when we talk about pec minor. Okay, and then of course we have suboccipitals. Again, they're grayed out. If you get back to these, great, but they're just the muscles at the base of the skull. They function like a back of neck muscle. They extend, side bend, ipso rotate. I wouldn't even worry about them. I've yet to see them come up or be mentioned. Okay, but just to complete it, there you go, suboccipitals. With the neck, you may as well just go right into the spine, because some of these spinal muscles cross to the neck as well, okay? So spine and thorax muscle, there are our transversal spinalis muscles grayed out. I wouldn't worry about them. Just kind of remember that they exist. Multifidi, rotatories, semispinalis capitis, they extend and contralaterally rotate the back. That's it. They don't usually come up. These bad boys do. Erector spinae group. Make sure you know your ESG, okay? Medial to lateral, you have spinalis, longissimus, and iliocostalis. Spinalis right in the spine, okay? Longissimus from the rooter to the tutor, okay? Or from the rooter to the tutor, whichever one is which. All the way down from the thoracolumbar fascia up to mastoid process, which is going to pop up. And then iliocostalis is the most lateral. It's on the coast, if you will, costalis, right? Goes to the ribs. Iliocostalis, from the ilium up to the ribs, underneath the scapula, okay? So spinalis, longissimus, iliocostalis. Some people like the mnemonic, I love spines, and that's working from lateral to medial, okay? They all start on the thoracolumbar fascia. So recognize this thoracolumbar fascia, several muscles attached to that, all of the ESG attached to it, the latissimus dorsi attaches to it, even the obliques wrap around, the anterior wrap around and attach to it, and as does the transverse abdominis. This is the thoracolumbar fascia, okay? And the erector spinae start on it. And then longissimus, like I said, attaches to the mastoid process. That was a test point. Yeah. And then iliocostalis goes to the ribs, but it says that right in the name, ilium to the costal, to the ribs, okay? They are not spinal rotators. They simply extend and laterally flex. When they bilaterally contract, which means both sides contract, they extend the back. When they unilaterally contract, you get side bending or lateral flexion, but they do not rotate, okay? Straight up and down the back. All right. While we're here, let's go on down to the quadratus lumborum, which is definitely a small muscle that you want to know, you want to be fully familiar with. It comes up in several ways, okay? So quadratus lumborum goes from the iliac crest to the 12th rib, also the transverse processes. So here we go. Iliocostalis right here, up to the 12th rib, okay? And the spinous processes right in here, okay? So it extends the back, it laterally flexes the back, but also elevates or laterally tilts the hip. Here we go with that doggone coxal bone again, right? So, oh, 1 second. Okay, so here we go with the quadratus lumborum. It can besides extension and lateral flexion of the hip, right? It also attaches to the top of the coxal bone, and what it can do is tilt the hip. So anybody watch Conan O'Brien, that thing he does with his hips, right? Looks something like that. Elevation of the hip. Okay. Elevation of the hip, elevation of the hip. All right. And when you have one side elevated, that means depression. Okay. So the question could say your client's right hip is elevated, or it might say their left hip is depressed. Okay. So elevation and depression looks like this. That also is called tilt. It could be tilted. Okay. Tilted up or tilted down. Tilt and elevation is the same thing. We also might hear hike the hip. If you have trail guide, you know he says that the QL hikes the hip. Okay. So remember, it can flex the spine, which is I'm a little teacup, or tilt the hip, which is Shakira. Okay. That's the difference. Flexion of the spine versus hip hike and tilt. Okay. It's all in the hips. Right. So several questions could come up like that. Your client has a elevated or their right hip is elevated or their left hip is depressed. Which muscle might be short and tight? Okay. If the right hip is elevated, then the right side is going to be short and tight. The left side is going to be long and overstretched. Okay. You'll see that in the sample questions. Okay. And then of course, anterior tilt, because besides tilting like this, we have this as well. And when you have an anterior tilt, you can feel how short and tight your QL is back here. Okay. So you want to know those. You want to know how QL tilts the hip. Okay. Side to side, front to back. All right, what's popping up here? Okay, then we have our rectus abdominis. Moving into the abdominals. We know there are 4 abdominals. The most superficial being rectus abdominis, the one that gets all the glory, the one that we see, right? Ow. Okay. Runs from the pubic crest up to the xiphoid process and the ribs, okay? Makes a rectangle right down the middle of your abdomen, of your trunk, okay? It's going to flex your trunk, okay? Flex your trunk and posterior tilt. It is a posterior tilt muscle. So it's the opposite of your QL, which is going to anterior tilt. If this gets tight, it's going to posterior tilt. This band is going to contract and pull your pelvis into a posterior tilt, okay? You do want to remember that. They will talk about the abdominis, rectus abdominis being a posterior tilt muscle, okay? Then you have your obliques, okay, in that order. Most superficial is rectus abdominis, then you have your external obliques, okay? The external obliques, and then you have the internal obliques, which are deeper, okay? The external obliques originates on the ribs, okay, and goes down to the iliac crest and rectus sheath. This is, let's see if we could see, there we go. This is your rectus sheath, okay? So what happens is the rectus abdominis is inside this sheath and the obliques attach to this sheath. So when we talk about them inserting on the sheath, the rectal sheath, it is like your abdominals, your rectus abdominals are in like a hot pocket of connective tissue. And the external and internal obliques and transverse abdominis attached to that rectus sheath, that connective tissue, okay? That's why when you see a picture, it's all white, okay? It's all white. It's inside this large connective tissue structure. And the muscles attach directly to it, okay? It attaches to that sheath. And that sheath, like I said, is like a hot pocket. It's like a breading around the rectus, muscle fibers. Okay. So that's what that means. And then internal obliques start on that's grayed out. I don't think that's really important, but here's what you do want to know about the internal and external obliques. Let me get my picture up. They both flex, okay? They kind of function like your neck muscles. They flex because they're on the front. There's one on each side, so they side bend and they rotate, but unfortunately in opposite directions, okay? So external obliques are contralateral rotator, internal ipso, internal ipso. External obliques contralaterally rotate, internal obliques ipsilaterally rotate. Here's what that looks like, okay? Before that, let me see. Compress. They also compress the abdominal contents, right? They help us suck in our stomach. Transverse abdominis is the deepest. It also compresses. I've yet to really see it come up. And here's the other thing about externals. This is a confirmed test point. Abdominals, the rectus abdominis is the most superficial, but as soon as you move laterally, external obliques are the most superficial fibers, okay? Most superficial of the group, but as soon as you move over to the side, external obliques are now your most superficial abdominals, okay? And they shake hands with serratus anterior. You see that? We call around here, around these parts, we call the serratus anterior the superhero muscle, because when you see it on comic books, you see that really exaggerated zigzag, okay? Up here, that's serratus anterior. Down here is external obliques, okay? That's what you're looking at on the side. So the most superficial fibers lateral to rectus abdominis is external obliques. Okay. And now I'm to my picture. What that looks like, that ipsilateral and contralateral rotation, is when you put on your seatbelt, you're sitting in your car, driver's seat or passenger side, the concept is the same. Let's say driver's side. You put on your seatbelt, you turn your shoulders to the right, right? That's right rotation of the torso. Now, when you do that, look at your seatbelt now, okay? The external obliques come down from the ribs like this. The internal obliques come up from the inguinal ligament. They both attach to the rectus sheath, but this is what your obliques look like, okay? The external are coming down from the ribs, down and forward. The internals are going up, okay? So when you put on your seatbelt and you turn your shoulders to the right, look at the path of your seatbelt. Externals, internals. Your left externals and your right internals are working together to turn your shoulders to the right. Okay? That's the best I can do to help visualize what that contralateral and ipsilateral rotation looks like. Put on your seatbelt and look at your seatbelt. I put on my driver's side, my shoulders turn to the right. My left externals and right internals are contracting to bring my shoulders to the right. If I sit on my passenger side, shoulders are turning to the left. Look at my seatbelt, right externals, left internals are working together to turn my shoulders to the left, okay? Try to visualize it that way. That way we're like contralateral, ipsilateral, what does that mean? That's what that means, okay? These come down, they pull you this way, okay? That's why you do like Russian twists and stuff when you're working out, okay? That's what I got. I hope that helps. Okay, and then there you go. Passenger side is the opposite, but same concept. Okay. Let me see if I can hold neck and spine questions. Can you guys see that? The poll did, oh, hold on. Now can you see it? Okay, so that first question, these are sample questions that kind of deal with these neck and spine movements, all right? So side bending to the right will have what effect? Okay, side bending to the right will have what effect? So if you side bend to the right, and we're talking about the neck, because if you look at the muscles, you'll know we're talking about the neck, is it going to shorten the right anterior scalene, lengthen the right middle scalene, shorten the left sternocleidomastoid, or shorten the left anterior scalene? what do you think is going to happen? I don't know, do you have to answer all 4 at one time? I put 4 on there. So side bending to the right. Okay, so let's do it. Let's side bend our neck to the right. Okay, now let's find our right anterior scalene. Is it going to be short? That's kind of a true statement. Okay, side bending to the right is going to shorten the right anterior scalene. In fact, side bending to the right is going to shorten everything on the right and lengthen everything on the left. So when you look at these answers, you have to look for the true statement. Lengthen the right scalene? Nope, because these are short. Shorten the left scalene? Nope, because these are long. Sorry, sternocleidomastoid. Shorten the left anterior scalene? Nope, because these are long. So when you see that shorten and lengthen as far as lateral flexion, do the thing. You're sitting there reading the test question. Okay, lateral flexion to the right or side bending to the right. All my right muscles are short. All my left muscles are long. So look for the true statement in your answers. So that one would be shorten the right scalene. Shorten the right scalene. The second one, which action will lengthen the fibers of the right quadratus lumborum? Okay, which action will lengthen the fibers of the right quadratus lumborum? Okay, so keep in mind, we want to lengthen the right QL. If I rotate to the right, first of all, does the QL rotate? No. So you can get rid of your rotation right off the bat. Rotation to the right, rotation to the left are not the answers. Those are the throwaways. So now we want to lengthen the right side. If I laterally flex to the right, is it short or long? It's going to be short. Okay, because if I laterally flex to the right, everything on this right side is short. Everything on this left side is long. Think about when you work out and you want to stretch the left side. You lengthen the left side and shorten the right side. So lateral flexion to the left will lengthen that right QL. Okay, so that answer would be lateral flexion to the left. Right? Which action will shorten the fibers of the left iliocostalis muscle? Which action will shorten the fibers of the left iliocostalis muscle? Okay. So this is where drilling your muscles, you already know, iliocostalis, it extends and side bends. Extends and side bends. No rotation. So we can get rid of rotation. That's a distractor. Okay. So then we're trying to shorten the left iliocostalis. If we flex the trunk, what is that going to do to an extensor? If we flex, our front muscles are short and our extensors are long. So that can't be the right answer. Side bending to the right is going to lengthen the left side, but extending is going to shorten both sides. Don't get wrapped up in the fact that they specifically called out the left side, because the left side is going to shorten right alongside the right side when you extend, because it's going to be a bilateral contraction. Okay. Remember, they like to throw in extra information that really doesn't matter. I'm the messenger, just telling you. It's just how it is. Okay. And then the last one, your client's right hip is elevated. Okay. Do the thing. Client's right hip is elevated. Which of the following is true of your client's condition? So if their right hip is elevated, what's going on? Okay. Right erector group is extended. Okay. Not really. Okay. The erector really don't act on the hip. Okay. Common sense will tell us that they are affected by this action, but not in Imblex world. They're really going for just the action. Okay. Right quadratus lumborum is hypertonic. Left quadratus lumborum is hypertonic, or right quadratus lumborum is hypotonic. So when you see the terms hypotonic and hypertonic, think of hyper tight and hypotight, under tight. So hypertonic is associated with short and tight. Hypotonic is lengthened or under tight, okay? Too loose, weak, if you will. So if your right hip is elevated, we're looking for a situation where the right side is tight, okay? The left side should be hypotonic. The right side would be hypertonic. So then the correct answer would be right quadratus lumborum is hypertonic. If the right hip is elevated, that means this is short and tight. It's pulling up this right hip. Okay. Just some examples. And then I had one for rotation. So rotation is a whole other beast, all right? So rotation to the right will what? Or these are regular muscles. They are not contralateral rotators. They are regular rotators. So rotation to the right is going to shorten our ipsilateral rotators on the right side and lengthen them on the left side. Okay, just like side bending, rotation's the same. Okay, for ipsilateral rotator, all these muscles are ipsilateral. So when you rotate to the right, we're short here and long here. Okay, so rotation to the right, we're looking for something that indicates shortness on the right side. And there's only one answer, and that would be shorten the right longest colli, because these are ipsilateral rotators, right side right, left side left. Okay, so rotation to the right is going to shorten the right longest colli. Okay, another one. What action of the neck will lengthen the fibers of the left splenius capitis? What action of the neck will lengthen the fibers of the left splenius capitis? Okay, so our left splenius capitis, we put our hands on it, all right? We want to lengthen those fibers. So rotation to the right, what does splenius capitis want to do? It wants to ipso-rotate, so it wants to pull to the left. That's going to shorten it. So this happens, the first one is right. So rotation to the right is indeed going to lengthen it. If we rotate to the left, like the second option, that's going to shorten it. If we extend, that's what it does. It's an extensor, so it's going to shorten it. If we laterally flex to the left, it's going to shorten it. But if we rotate to the right, it's going to stretch that muscle. It's going to stretch it. Okay, so these are how you're going to see these questions on MBLEX. Another one, rotation to the left. And here's where your contralateral rotator gets mixed in with your ipsilateral rotators, and it takes that extra level of breaking down. Okay, quintessential MBLEX. Rotation to the left. How is it going to affect the right sternocleidomastoid? If you can't wrap your mind around the question, go to the answers. So if I lengthen, if I turn to the left, what is it going to do to my right sternocleidomastoid? Okay. Sternocleidomastoid is a contralateral rotator. So my right one wants to turn my head to the left. Okay. So it's going to shorten my right sternocleidomastoid. That is not a true statement. So that's not the right answer. It will not lengthen my right sternocleidomastoid. Okay. My right splenius capitis. If I turn to the left, will it shorten my right splenius capitis? No, because my right splenius capitis wants to turn me to the right. So if I turn to the left, it's going to lengthen my right splenius capitis. Okay, what about my left scalenes? If I rotate to the left, will it lengthen my scalenes? Yes, because these scalenes are like the sternocleidomastoid. They want to turn to the right. That's going to shorten them. If I turn to the left, it will indeed lengthen them. So that is the correct answer. Rotation to the left will lengthen the left scalenes because they are contralateral rotators. When you see these questions, it's difficult to wrap your mind around them. You have to try to, any way you can. If it's easier to rotate to the left and then identify which ones are long and short, do that. If it's easier to go through each answer and decide what does that situation mean in regards to the question, or you can try to find the oddball in the questions. There's no right or wrong way, whichever one works for you. But this is probably the contralateral rotation is about as complex as it gets when it comes to these neck questions. Okay, and then here's another one. Which action will shorten the fibers of the right external oblique? Which action will shorten the fibers of the right external oblique? Okay, rotation to the right. First of all, we know it's a contralateral rotator. So my right oblique wants to turn me to the left. If I turn to the right, it's going to stretch this oblique up here. All right, so that's not a true statement. Okay, rotation to the right will not shorten these fibers. It's going to lengthen them. What about flexion? Okay, do the external obliques, they flex? Yeah, so actually that will shorten the fibers of the right external oblique. Going through with the rest of the wrong ones, lateral flexion to the left is going to lengthen the right side. Not a true statement. Extension is going to lengthen all of the obliques. So that's not a true statement. So flexion will shorten the fibers of the external oblique. That's your true statement. Okay? Just some examples of how these questions come up. They serious out here. That's just how it be. I'm sorry. I didn't write it. All right, so